The massive space station hung in the void like a metallic city, its lights stretching for miles in every direction. Nexus Prime was the heart of galactic civilization, home to the council that had ruled 1,000 worlds for over 3,000 years. Inside its gleaming halls, representatives from dozens of species gathered to make decisions that affected billions of lives across the galaxy. Admiral Jake Morrison walked through the station's corridors, his black uniform marking him as one of the few humans allowed in this sacred space. The other beings barely glanced at him as he passed. To them, he was nothing more than a curiosity from a backward world that had only recently learned to travel between stars. The towering insectoid creatures clicked their mandibles in what might have been conversation, while the floating gas-based life forms pulsed with colors that hurt human eyes to look at directly. Jake had been Earth's representative for 2 years. Now, ever since humanity made first contact with the galactic community. It had been an exciting time at first, filled with wonder at the vast civilizations that existed beyond their small blue planet. But the excitement had slowly turned to unease as he learned how the galaxy really worked. The council chamber was a massive dome filled with platforms that floated at different heights, each one designed for the specific needs of different species. Some platforms held pools of liquid methane for aquatic beings, others were pressurized with poisonous gases that would kill a human in seconds. Jake's platform was one of the smallest, positioned near the back where the least important members. Today felt different, though. The chamber buzzed with an energy that made Jake's skin crawl. He had requested this emergency session after receiving disturbing intelligence reports from Earth, but now he wondered if that had been a mistake. The way the other delegates looked at him suggested they already knew why he was here. Council Prime Vextara floated at the center of the chamber, her crystalline body catching the light from a dozen different suns. She was ancient even by galactic standards, having led the council for over 500 years. Her voice resonated through harmonic frequencies that the translator in Jake's ear converted to words, though something was always lost in translation. Representative Morrison, she said, her crystal form pulsing with pale blue light. You have requested this session to address certain activities by your species. We have decided to address these matters ourselves. Jake felt his stomach drop. This wasn't going to be the diplomatic discussion he had hoped for. The other delegates shifted on their platforms, some making sounds that his translator couldn't interpret. He had seen this before during his time here, when the council decided to discipline a species that had stepped out of line. The species designated Human Terra has committed several violations of galactic law, Vextara continued. First, you have expanded your military forces beyond the limits established for new species. Second, you have refused to share advanced weapons technology with the Council for review and approval. Third, and most serious, you have established and authorized colonies and systems beyond your home territory. The accusations hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake knew they were true, but he also knew why Earth had made these decisions. The galaxy was not the peaceful place the Council pretended it was. In his 2 years here, he had learned about dozens of species that had been pacified by the Council when they became too independent or too powerful. Council Prime, Jake said, standing on his small platform. Earth has acted only to protect itself and its citizens. We have seen what happens to species that become too dependent on Council protection. They lose their independence, their culture, their right to make their own choices. A sound rippled through the chamber that might have been laughter if beings made of living metal could laugh. Delegate Korthmyron, whose own species had been pacified 2 centuries ago, spoke up. Representative Morrison, your species suffers from the same delusion that affects all primitives. You believe independence is more valuable than security. You believe freedom is worth the risk of chaos. Perhaps, Jake replied, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. But we also believe that a life lived on your knees is no life at all. The chamber fell silent. Even the constant humming of the station's system seemed to pause. No one spoke to the Council like that, especially not a representative from a species that could barely defend itself against a single Council fleet. Vexthara's form pulsed with darker colors now, purples and deep blues that suggested anger or perhaps disappointment. Your species has 30 standard cycles to comply with the following demands. All military production will cease immediately. Your fleet will be reduced to civilian vessels only, suitable for trade and exploration, but not warfare. All colonial expansion beyond your home system will halt, and existing unauthorized colonies will be evacuated. And if Earth refuses? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Then Earth will face the consequences of defying galactic law, Vexthara replied. The Council has been patient with your species' primitive aggression, but that patience has limits. You have 30 cycles to decide whether you wish to join the galactic community as a civilized species, or face the same fate as others who chose chaos over order. Jake looked around the chamber at the hundreds of delegates from species across the galaxy. Some watched with interest, others with boredom, many with the same expression he imagined spectators at ancient Roman games might have worn when watching gladiators fight to the death. None of them would speak up for humanity. None of them would risk the Council's displeasure to defend a species they saw as backward and troublesome. I will carry your message to Earth, Jake said finally. But I think you should know that humans have a saying, give me liberty, or give me death. We would rather die free than live as slaves. How primitive? Korthmyron said, his metallic voice dripping with contempt. Death is so final, so wasteful. Submission offers so many more possibilities. Perhaps, Jake replied, but at least death is honest. The session ended with the formal recording of the Council's demands. Jake was given a data crystal containing the exact terms of humanity's surrender, as well as detailed instructions for the transition process. He had seen these documents before, when other species had faced the same choice. The process was always the same: overwhelming force, demands for surrender, occupation of major population centers, and finally the slow dissolution of the species. Independence until they became just another client state in the Council's vast empire. As Jake made his way back to his quarters, he passed by the memorial wall that honored the Council's peaceful integration of new species. 43 names were carved into the crystalline surface, each one representing a civilization that had once been free and independent. Now they were nothing more than historical footnotes, their resources and populations managed by Council oversight. Jake pressed his hand against the wall and made a silent promise. Humanity's name would never be added to this list. Whatever the cost, whatever the price, Earth would remain free. The only question now was whether the rest of the galaxy was ready for what humans were willing to do to keep their freedom. The stars outside his window seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if they too knew that something was about to change in the galaxy forever. The emergency session had been going on for 3 days without a break. President Helen Carter stood at the head of the massive conference table in the Situation Room deep beneath the United Earth Government headquarters. The room was filled with the most important people on the planet, and they were all arguing about whether humanity should surrender or fight. The holographic displays around the room showed numbers that made everyone feel sick. The Galactic Council had over 50,000 warships spread across their territory. Earth had maybe 300 ships that could be called warships, and most of those were really just converted civilian vessels with weapons bolted on. The math was simple and terrifying. General Robert Hayes was the head of Earth's military forces, and he had been trying to explain reality to the politicians for hours. We cannot win a straight fight against the Council, he said for what felt like the 100th time. They have been building their forces for thousands of years. We have been building ours for 5 years. A child could tell you how this ends. Dr. Lisa Martinez was Earth's top expert on alien species, and she had spent those 5 years studying everyone humanity had met. But we do not know everything about how they fight, she argued. They have shown us their trade ships and their patrol vessels. They have shown us their technology for peaceful purposes. We have never seen them actually fight a war. Director Paul Stevens ran Earth's intelligence services, and his people had been working day and night to gather information about the Council's military. What we do know is not good, he said grimly. 43 different species have been forced to surrender to the Council in the past century. Every single one of them was completely defeated. Their governments were dissolved, their militaries were disbanded, and their people were put under Council control. President Carter rubbed her temples where a headache was building. She had been listening to the same arguments for 3 days, and no one seemed to have any new ideas. Half the room wanted to surrender immediately and hoped the Council would be merciful. The other half wanted to fight even though they knew they would lose. What about Admiral Morrison? She asked. He has been with the Council for 2 years. What does he think we should do? The secure communication channel crackled to life, and Jake Morrison's voice filled the room. He was still on the Council station, thousands of light years away, but the quantum communication system made it feel like he was right there with them. Madam President, he said, I have been watching these aliens for 2 years. They are not gods. They are not invincible. They are bureaucrats who have been in charge for so long that they have forgotten how to deal with anyone who says no to them. General Hayes leaned forward. Admiral, with respect, saying no to them is not the same as being able to fight them. They have the ships and the weapons to crush us. Maybe, Jake replied, but they have something else too. They have never lost a fight. They have never had to adapt to an enemy who did not follow their rules. Every species they have defeated fought them the same way, with big fleets meeting in open space and following all the proper military procedures. Dr. Martinez caught on first. You are saying they do not know how to fight an enemy who breaks the rules. Exactly, Jake said. I have been reading their military histories. Every single conquest followed the same pattern. They demand surrender. The enemy refuses, they send a big fleet. The enemy meets them in a conventional battle, and the Council wins because they have more ships. It has worked for them for thousands of years. President Carter felt a spark of hope for the first time. In days, so what are you suggesting? I am suggesting we do not fight them the way they expect, Jake said. We do not meet their fleets in open space. We do not follow their rules. We make them play our game instead of playing theirs. The room fell quiet as everyone considered. It was Director Stevens who spoke up first. Are you talking about guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run tactics? I am talking about being human, Jake replied. Every other species in the galaxy seems to think there is only one way to fight a war. They build big fleets, they have big battles, and whoever has the most ships wins. But humans have never fought that way. We have always been outnumbered, outgunned and outmatched, and we have always found a way to win anyway. General Hayes was shaking his head. Admiral, this is not some historical battle on Earth. This is space warfare against an enemy with technology we can barely understand. The technology does not matter, Jake said. What matters is the thinking. They think in straight lines. They follow procedures. They do what has always worked before. We need to do what has never been done before. President Carter was starting to see the shape of an idea. What exactly are you proposing? First, we do not give them an answer when they expect one, Jake said. We go dark. All communication with Council representatives stops. All human ships and stations disappear. We make them come looking for us. And then what? Dr. Martinez asked. Then we show them that conquering humanity is not the same as conquering anyone else, Jake replied. We do not defend Earth the way they expect. We do not put our fleet between them and our planet. We turn our entire solar system into a trap. The idea was so crazy that it took everyone a moment to process it. Director Stevens was the first to speak. You want to evacuate Earth? Not evacuate, Jake corrected. Relocate. We move our civilians to safe places, we hide our important facilities, and we turn everything else into a weapon. Every asteroid, every moon, every piece of space junk becomes part of our defense? This is insane, General Hayes said. We are talking about abandoning our home planet. No, President Carter said slowly. We are talking about making sure we still have a home planet when this is over. If we fight them the way they expect, we lose. If we surrender, we lose everything that makes us human. But if we fight them in a way they have never seen before, maybe we can survive long enough to make them reconsider." The debate continued for hours, but the idea was taking shape. Humanity would not surrender, and they would not fight a conventional war they could not win. Instead, they would do what humans had always done when faced with impossible odds. They would change the rules of the game. Jake Morrison's voice came through the communication system one more time. "Madam President, I need to know. Are we really going to do this? Are we really going to tell the most powerful force in the galaxy that we refuse to bow down?" President Carter looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. She saw fear there, but she also saw determination. She saw people who would rather die fighting than live on their knees. "Yes, Admiral," she said. "We are going to do this. Send a message to every human settlement, every ship, every station. Tell them to prepare for war. Tell them that Earth refuses to surrender." The room erupted in activity as people began making plans for the most desperate gamble in human history. They were going to fight the entire galaxy, and they were going to do it their way. Dr. Alan Cooper looked like the most boring man in the galaxy. He was short, thin, and wore thick glasses that made his eyes look too big for his face. For 3 years, he had worked on Council infrastructure projects, designing power systems and communication networks for their space stations. The alien engineers he worked with barely noticed him, which was exactly what he wanted. What they did not know was that Alan Cooper was one of Earth's most valuable spies. Every day for 3 years, he had been gathering information about Council technology, military procedures, and most importantly, how they thought about warfare. The report he sent back to Earth would change everything. "The Council's military is powerful," Alan wrote in his encrypted message to Director Stevens, "but it is also predictable. They have been using the same tactics for thousands of years. Because those tactics have always worked. They rely on overwhelming force and superior technology to win battles before they really start. The problem is that they have never faced an enemy who refused to fight on their terms." Back on Earth, Director Stevens was reading Alan's report for the 3rd time. The intelligence was incredible, but it was also terrifying. The Council had weapons that could destroy entire planets, shields that could stop any attack Earth could mount, and ships that were faster and more maneuverable than anything humans had ever built. "But here is the important part," Alan's report continued. "They are bureaucrats commanding a bureaucratic military. Every battle they have ever fought followed the same pattern. They demand surrender, the enemy refuses, they send a fleet, the enemy meets them in open space, and the Council wins because they have more ships. They have never had to adapt to new tactics because no one has ever tried new tactics against them." Admiral Kate Sullivan was reading the same report in her office aboard the flagship of Earth's defense fleet. She had been a naval officer for 20 years, and she understood what Alan was telling them. The Council was like a heavyweight boxer who had never faced anyone who would not stand still and trade punches. "They think war is about having the biggest fleet and the best weapons," she said to her senior officers. "But war is really about making your enemy fight on your terms instead of theirs. We cannot match their technology, but we can refuse to fight the way they expect." The plan that emerged was unlike anything that had ever been attempted in Galactic history. Instead of building more ships to fight the Council fleet, Earth would scatter its forces and disappear. Every human settlement, every research station, every mining operation would go dark and relocate to hidden positions throughout the outer systems. Captain Mike Johnson was in charge of evacuating the Mars colonies. He had been born on Mars and had never lived anywhere else, but he understood what was at stake. "We are not running away," he told his people as they packed their belongings onto transport ships. "We are getting ready to fight in a way that the Council has never seen before." The evacuation was massive and complex. Millions of people had to be moved from their homes to secret locations that had been prepared over the past 5 years. Underground bases on asteroids, hidden facilities in the outer planets, mobile platforms that could move from system to system without being detected. Dr. Lisa Martinez was overseeing the psychological warfare aspects of the plan. She had studied council species for years, and she knew their weaknesses. They are used to being in control, she explained to the planning committee. They expect other species to follow their rules and respond to their threats in predictable ways. When we disappear, when we refuse to play their game, it will confuse them. The confusion was already starting. Council representatives throughout human space were reporting that their contacts had stopped responding to communications. Trade vessels that had been following regular schedules simply vanished. Research stations that had been broadcasting scientific data for years went silent on Nexus Prime. Admiral Jake Morrison was watching the Council's reaction with satisfaction. The alien delegates were becoming increasingly agitated as reports came in from across human space. They had expected Earth to either surrender or prepare for a conventional defense. Instead, humanity had simply vanished. "This is unprecedented," Council Prime Vexthara said during an emergency session. "No species has ever responded to our ultimatum by disappearing. What are they planning?" Jake stood on his platform and tried to look confused. "I'm afraid I do not understand what you mean. Council Prime, Earth has not communicated with me since your ultimatum was delivered. Perhaps they are still considering their response." 27 days have passed, Vexthara replied, her crystal form pulsing with dark colors. "The deadline for their response was yesterday. Instead of an answer, we receive only silence." The truth was that Earth had been preparing for this moment since first contact 5 years ago. While the Council thought they were dealing with a primitive species that had just learned to travel between stars, humans had been working day and night to understand their new neighbors and prepare for the inevitable conflict. Director Stevens had established intelligence networks on dozens of worlds. Earth scientists had been studying captured Council technology and developing countermeasures. The military had been training for unconventional warfare in zero-gravity environments that would confuse alien tactics. Most importantly, humans had been building weapons and fortifications in secret locations throughout their solar system. The asteroid belt had been turned into a maze of hidden bases and weapon platforms. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn held massive stockpiles of missiles and defensive systems. Even the seemingly empty space between planets had been seeded with mines and sensor networks. Admiral Sullivan was coordinating the final preparations from her flagship, which was now hidden in the shadow of a small asteroid. "Remember," she broadcast to all human forces, "we are not trying to win a conventional war. We are trying to make the Council realize that conquering us will cost more than they are willing to pay." The plan was based on a simple principle that humans had learned throughout their history. You do not have to be stronger than your enemy to defeat them. You just have to make victory too expensive for them to accept. Captain Lisa Warren was commanding one of the forward scout groups that would make first contact with the Council fleet. "They expect us to meet them in open space with our fleet arranged in traditional battle formations," she told her crew. "Instead, we are going to hit them from directions they never expected and then disappear before they can respond." The final piece of the puzzle was psychological. Humans had spent 5 years learning about Council psychology, and they had discovered something interesting. The Council species were used to being in control, to following established procedures, to having their authority respected. They had never faced an enemy who simply refused to acknowledge their power. "When they arrive," Jake Morrison explained in his final communication with Earth, "they will expect to find a frightened planet ready to surrender. Instead, they will find empty space and silence. They will not know what to do with that." The stage was set for the most unusual war in galactic history. The Council would bring their massive fleet expecting to find a conventional enemy ready to fight a conventional battle. Instead, they would find something they had never encountered before: humans who refused to play by the rules. Admiral Zephyrin had commanded Council fleets for over 200 years, and he had never seen anything like this. His massive fleet of 500 warships hung in space just outside Earth's solar system, waiting for orders that seemed to make less sense every hour. The reports from his scouts were impossible to believe. Sir, his aide reported, long-range scans confirm the initial findings. Earth's major cities show signs of partial evacuation, but the planet is not defenseless. We are detecting massive energy signatures from multiple locations throughout the system. Zephyrin studied the holographic display showing Earth's solar system. His species had evolved in the deep ocean of their homeworld, and his natural ability to process three-dimensional information made him one of the Council's best military commanders. But what he was seeing made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare. "They have turned their entire star system into a fortress," he said, his voice carrying the confusion he felt. "This is not how civilized species conduct warfare. Where are their battle fleets? Where are their defensive formations?" The answer came sooner than he expected. Captain Lisa Warren's small frigate appeared on the edge of the system, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Council Fleet, this is Captain Warren of the Earth Defense Force. You are entering human space without permission. Please state your intentions." Zephyrin could not believe what he was hearing. A single human ship, barely large enough to qualify as a warship, was challenging his entire fleet. "Human vessel," he replied, "you will surrender immediately or face the consequences of your defiance." "Negative, Council Fleet," Warren responded. "Earth does not recognize your authority in this system. If you wish to proceed, you will have to go through us." What happened next would be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for generations. Instead of waiting for the Council Fleet to advance, Captain Warren's ship launched a spread of missiles and immediately jumped to hyperspace. The missiles were not aimed at the Council ships, but at seemingly empty space between the fleet and Earth. "Evasive maneuvers," Zephyrin shouted, but it was too late. The missiles detonated in a chain reaction that lit up space like a miniature sun. When the sensors cleared, his fleet was surrounded by a field of metal fragments and sensor jamming devices that made it impossible to see what was happening around them. "Report," Zephyrin demanded. "We have lost contact with the advanced scout group," his communications officer reported. "Sensors are being jammed across multiple frequencies. We cannot tell where the human ships are or what they are planning. This was not how wars were supposed to be fought." In every conflict Zephyrin had ever commanded, the enemy met his fleet in open space with their own battle formations. There would be formal challenges, traditional maneuvers, and finally a decisive battle where the larger fleet would win. This chaos was completely outside his experience. The second attack came from a direction that should have been impossible. A group of human ships appeared directly above the Council fleet, having somehow approached from the solar system's north pole where no civilized species would think to look. They fired a barrage of kinetic projectiles, simple chunks of metal, accelerated to incredible speeds before disappearing again into hyperspace. "Damage report," Zephyrin called out as his flagship shook from multiple impacts. 17 ships destroyed, 23 damaged, came the reply. "Sir, these are not energy weapons or guided missiles. They are using primitive kinetic projectiles that our shields were not designed to stop." Zephyrin felt something he had never experienced in 2 centuries of military service: uncertainty. The humans were not fighting like any enemy he had ever faced. They appeared without warning, struck with weapons that made no sense, and disappeared before his fleet could respond. It was like trying to fight ghosts. "All ships, advance toward Earth," he ordered. "We will force them to defend their homeworld in a proper battle." But as his fleet moved deeper into the solar system, the attacks became more frequent and more devastating. Human ships appeared from behind asteroids, from the shadows of moons, from directions that his sensors insisted were empty space. Each attack lasted only minutes before the humans vanished again, but each attack cost him ships and crew. The asteroid belt was the worst. What should have been a simple passage through scattered rocks turned into a nightmare of hidden weapons and booby traps. Asteroids that looked empty suddenly revealed themselves to be weapons platforms. Mines that had been drifting in space for years suddenly activated when Council ships passed nearby. "This is not warfare," Zephyrin said to his senior officers. "This is terrorism. They are not fighting to defend their territory. They are fighting to make us pay for every kilometer we advance. Captain Mike Johnson was commanding one of the human strike groups that had been harassing the Council fleet. For 3 days, his ships were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had advantages that the Council could not match. They knew the system better than anyone. They could move through hyperspace faster than the Council ships could track them. And most importantly, they were not trying to win a conventional victory. Remember, Johnson told his pilots, we are not trying to destroy their entire fleet. We are trying to show them that conquering us will cost more than they bargained for. Hit them hard, hit them fast, and get out before they can respond. The psychological impact on the Council fleet was enormous. These were soldiers who had never faced serious resistance before. They had always been the ones with superior numbers and technology, always the ones who could dictate the terms of battle. Now they were being picked apart by an enemy they could barely see, using tactics they did not understand. Sir, Zephyrin S. Aide reported, we have now lost 63 ships. The humans have lost only 7. At this rate, we will suffer unacceptable casualties before we even reach Earth. Zephyrin studied the tactical display and realized something that shocked him. The humans were not just winning individual battles. They were winning the war, not by destroying his fleet, but by making him afraid to continue advancing. For the first time in his career, he was considering retreat. How many ships do we estimate the humans have? He asked. Intelligence suggests. No more than 300 total, came the reply. But they are not fighting like a conventional fleet. They attack in small groups, they use the terrain to their advantage, and they refuse to engage in the kind of decisive battle that would allow us to use our numerical superiority. The truth was even more disturbing. The humans were not just fighting a guerrilla war, they were enjoying it. Intercepted communications showed human crews joking and singing as they prepared for battle. They were not fighting with the grim determination of a doomed species, but with the enthusiasm of people who had found something they were good at. Admiral Zephyrin made a decision that would change galactic history. Instead of continuing his advance toward Earth, he ordered his fleet to stop and establish a defensive perimeter. For the first time in Council military history, a superior force had been stopped by an inferior enemy. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Humanity had bloodied the nose of the most powerful military force in known space, and they had done it with tactics that no one had ever seen before. The news reached every corner of the galaxy within hours. For the first time in over 1,000 years, a Council military fleet had been stopped by an inferior force. Species that had lived under Council rule for centuries whispered in their homes about the humans who had said no and made it stick. On Nexus Prime, Council Prime Vexthara stood in the emergency session chamber, her crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated extreme agitation. The reports from Admiral Zephyrin made no sense according to everything the Council knew about warfare and civilization. Explain to me again how a primitive species with 300 ships has inflicted such casualties on our fleet, she demanded of the military advisors who surrounded her platform. General Korth-Myron, whose own species had surrendered to the Council 2 centuries ago, shifted uncomfortably. Council Prime, the humans are not fighting according to established military doctrine. They refuse to engage in proper fleet actions. They attack from unexpected directions and retreat before we can respond. It is not civilized warfare. Civilized or not, it appears to be effective, Vexthara replied coldly. We have lost more ships in this engagement than we have lost in the previous century of pacification campaigns combined. What the Council did not understand was that the real battle was not happening in space around Earth. The real battle was happening in the minds of every species across the galaxy who had been told that resistance to the Council was impossible. Captain Lisa Warren stood on the bridge of her damaged cruiser as it limped back toward Earth's hidden defensive positions. Her ship had taken heavy damage in the latest engagement with Council forces, but her crew was working to repair it with an energy that seemed impossible given their circumstances. Captain, her communications officer called out, we are receiving broadcasts from across the galaxy. Other species are talking about what we did to the Council fleet. Warren activated the main display and watched as intercepted communications scrolled past. Messages from a dozen different worlds, all talking about the same thing. Humans had fought the Council and won. Not a total victory, but something even more important. They had proven that the Council could be resisted. "Ma'am," her weapons. Officer said, "The repair crews are singing again." Warren smiled. It was true. Throughout the ship, human crew members were singing old songs from Earth as they worked to fix battle damage. They were not singing like people who expected to die, but like people who had discovered something wonderful about themselves back on Earth. President Helen Carter was reading reports from intelligence agents embedded throughout Council space. The psychological impact of humanity's resistance was spreading faster than the Council could contain it. Species that had been completely passive for generations were asking questions they had not asked in centuries. The Council is facing something they have never had to deal with before, Director Paul Stevens reported. Doubt. For thousands of years, their authority has been absolute and unquestioned. Now, for the first time, other species are wondering if the Council can be challenged. The final shock came when Admiral Jake Morrison's message reached the Council chambers. He had requested permission to address the emergency session, and the Council had agreed, expecting to receive humanity's surrender. Instead, they got something completely different. Morrison stood on his platform, still wearing his human military uniform despite being surrounded by the most powerful beings in the galaxy. His ship had been damaged in the recent fighting, and there were burn marks on his jacket from a hull breach that had nearly killed him. But his voice was steady and strong as he spoke. "Council Prime Vextara, members of the Galactic Council," he began. "I have been asked to deliver Earth's response to your ultimatum." The chamber fell silent. Every delegate, every aide, every observer waited to hear humanity's surrender. They had seen the casualty reports from the fleet. They knew that Earth could not continue to resist indefinitely. "The people of Earth have considered your demands carefully," Morrison continued. "You asked us to surrender our military forces, to abandon our colonies, to place ourselves under Council authority for our own protection. You told us that compliance was not optional." Vextara's crystal form pulsed with anticipation. Finally, the humans would see reason and accept their place in the galactic order. "Here is our answer," Morrison said, and his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. No, the single word hung in the air like a physical presence. No species had ever given such a simple, direct refusal to a Council ultimatum. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "we reject the premise of your authority over us. We reject the idea that strength gives you the right to control other species. We reject the notion that security is worth more than freedom." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers and alien sounds that the translators could not interpret. This was unprecedented. This was impossible. "No one spoke to the Council this way." Morrison was not finished. "You have ruled this galaxy by making species choose between submission and extinction. But you missed a third option, resistance. We choose to resist. Not because we think we can defeat you everywhere and in every battle, but because we believe that some things are worth fighting for even when you cannot win." Council Prime Vextara's form was now pulsing with deep red colors that indicated extreme anger. "Human, you are making a mistake that will cost your species everything. We have the power to destroy your entire civilization. Maybe," Morrison replied calmly, "but you will have to pay a price for it that you have never had to pay before. Every human ship you destroy, we will build 2 more. Every world you occupy, we will make too expensive to hold. Every day you spend fighting us is a day when other species will be watching and learning that the Council can be resisted." The truth of his words was already becoming apparent. Reports were coming in from across Council space about small acts of defiance, questions about Council authority, requests for information about human resistance tactics. The virus of rebellion was spreading. "We do not need to defeat your entire fleet," Morrison continued. "We do not need to conquer your territories or destroy your civilization. We just need to make you understand that controlling us will cost more than you are willing to pay." Morrison paused and looked around the chamber at the hundreds of alien faces staring at him. "You have spent 3,000 years telling species what they can and cannot do. Well, here is what humans can do. We can choose to remain free, no matter what the cost. We can choose to fight for our right to make our own mistakes and follow our own path. And we can show the rest of the galaxy that your authority is not absolute." The communication ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. For the first time in their long history, they faced an enemy that was not fighting to win, but fighting to prove a point. And that point was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. On distant worlds, species that had forgotten what independence felt like began to remember. The age of unquestioned council dominance was ending, and everyone knew it. Humanity had lit a fire that would burn across the stars, and no force in the galaxy could put it out.